Did you know that the average American household is paying nearly $1,500 more per year due to trade tensions between the U.S. and its biggest economic rivals? And that's just the beginning. Right now, the world of global trade is shifting like never before. The United States, once a champion of free trade and massive international agreements, is turning inward, prioritizing protectionist policies, reshaping alliances, and putting America first. But here's the real question. Is this bold new strategy a masterstroke that will strengthen the U.S. economy, or is it a ticking time bomb that could backfire, isolating America from its allies and triggering a full-blown global trade war? From tariffs on Chinese goods skyrocketing to tense trade disputes with traditional allies like the EU, Canada, and Mexico, from subsidies that could reshape entire industries to new economic alliances that may challenge China's dominance, this is not just another political move. It's a fundamental shift in how the U.S. engages with the world. And the consequences. They'll impact you, your job, your business, the prices you pay, and the future of the global economy. So, buckle up, because in the next few minutes, we're breaking down exactly how U.S. trade policies are evolving, what it means for you, and whether we're on the brink of an economic showdown that could change everything. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The shift from multilateral to bilateral focus. For decades, the U.S. led the charge in creating vast multilateral trade agreements, believing that larger economic blocs would lead to greater stability and prosperity. Deals like NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, were designed to create expansive trade networks, binding nations together through common economic interests. However, the tides have turned. The current administration has shifted away from large, complex multilateral agreements in favor of smaller, more controlled bilateral deals. The reasoning? Greater leverage and flexibility. In a one-on-one trade negotiation, the U.S. can push for better terms without having to compromise with multiple countries. Take, for instance, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which replaced NAFTA. This agreement introduced new labor and environmental standards that weren't in the original deal, favoring U.S. industries. Similarly, the administration has focused on bilateral agreements with key partners like Japan and the UK, ensuring each deal serves specific domestic economic goals rather than broader international compromises. But this approach isn't without risks. By sidelining multilateral institutions like the WTO, World Trade Organization, the U.S. is also isolating itself from traditional allies. Many countries prefer multilateral trade deals because they provide stability and collective bargaining power. Critics argue that focusing solely on bilateral deals could weaken global trade relationships in the long run. Chapter 2. The Rise of Protectionist Measures. America First isn't just a political slogan. It's a core philosophy shaping today's trade policies. In an effort to protect domestic industries and reduce dependence on foreign manufacturing, the administration has leaned into tariffs, trade barriers, and industrial policy incentives. Tariffs, once a rarely used tool, have now become a go-to economic weapon. Take the U.S.-China trade war as an example. Since 2018, the U.S. has imposed tariffs on over $550 billion worth of Chinese goods, affecting everything from electronics to clothing. Most recently, tariffs on key Chinese imports were raised from 10% to 20%, a move intended to level the playing field for American businesses. Beyond China, tariffs have also targeted European steel and aluminum, leading to tensions with the EU. Even close allies like Canada and Mexico have been caught in the crossfire as the U.S. pushes for greater domestic production of essential materials. Protectionism isn't just about tariffs, though. The government has also ramped up subsidies for American industries, particularly in sectors like semiconductors, electric vehicles, and clean energy. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, for example, provides massive incentive for U.S. companies producing EV batteries domestically, discouraging imports from foreign manufacturers. But here's the catch. Protectionist policies cut both ways. Countries targeted by U.S. tariffs are retaliating with their own measures. China, for instance, has restricted exports of rare earth minerals, critical for tech and defense industries, creating new challenges for American manufacturers. Chapter 3. Impact on domestic industries. At first glance, protectionist policies seem like a win for U.S. manufacturers. Higher tariffs on imports mean that American-made goods become more competitive, helping to boost domestic production and job growth. Take the semiconductor industry, one of the biggest beneficiaries of the new trade policies. The U.S. government has poured billions into reviving domestic chip manufacturing, aiming to reduce reliance on Asian producers like Taiwan and South Korea. As a result, companies like Intel and TSMC are expanding their U.S. operations, creating thousands of new jobs. But not every industry is celebrating. Many American businesses rely on imported materials and components, and tariffs have significantly raised production costs. The automotive sector, for example, has been hit hard. U.S. car manufacturers source a significant portion of their part from China and Mexico, and the increased tariff have forced them to either absorb higher costs or pass them on to consumers. A recent report showed that the average price of an American-made vehicle has increased by over $1,500 due to new trade restrictions. Even everyday products aren't immune. The toy industry, which relies on China for nearly 80% of its products, expects price hikes of 15% to 20%. That means this holiday season, parents may find themselves paying significantly more for the same toys they bought last year. And then there's the agricultural sector. Many U.S. farmers depend on exports, particularly to China, which has long been a top buyer of American soybeans and corn. But with ongoing trade disputes, China has shifted its purchasing to Brazil and Argentina, leaving many American farmers struggling to find alternative markets. Chapter 4. Relations with traditional allies, from friends to frenemies. For decades, the United States has maintained strong trade relationships with Canada, Mexico, the European Union, and Japan. These partnerships were built on the idea that open markets and fair competition benefit everyone. However, recent U.S. trade policies have strained these historic alliances, creating friction where there was once cooperation. Take steel and aluminum. For example, in an effort to protect American metal industries, the U.S. government imposed tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum imports, even on allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. The move sent shockwaves through global markets. Canada, in particular, was outraged. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the tariffs an affront to the long-standing security partnership between the two countries. The EU didn't take it lightly either. In retaliation, Europe slapped tariff on iconic American products, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles, bourbon whiskey, and Levi's jeans, a clear message that they wouldn't back down. Mexico, another key trading partner, responded by imposing tariffs on American pork, cheese, and whiskey. This was a major hit to U.S. farmers, many of whom rely heavily on exports. But the most significant showdown may be with the European Union over green energy subsidies. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, which incentivizes American companies to build EV batteries, solar panels, and clean energy technology domestically, has left European leaders frustrated. They argue that these subsidies disadvantage European businesses, leading some to call for a buy-European retaliation policy. The big question, can these relationships be repaired? Or is the U.S. moving towards a more confrontational stance, even with its closest allies? Chapter 5. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, a grand plan or just talk. With China's rapid economic rise, the U.S. has been searching for ways to counter Beijing's growing influence, especially in Asia. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, is Washington's latest answer to this challenge. Announced in 2022, the IPEF was pitched as a new economic alliance designed to deepen trade and investment ties between the U.S. and key Indo-Pacific countries, including Japan, India, Australia, South Korea, and several Southeast Asian nations. The initiative focuses on 4 key pillars. 1. Supply chain resilience, reducing dependence on China for critical materials like semiconductors and rare earth minerals. 2. Clean energy and decarbonization, encouraging investments in renewable energy and carbon-neutral technologies. 3. Fair trade practices, addressing issues like corruption, digital trade, and labor standards. 4. Tax and anti-corruption standards, creating stronger financial transparency rules across participating countries. Sounds promising, right? Not so fast. The biggest issue? The IPEF doesn't offer what many Asian countries really want, access to the U.S. market. Unlike traditional trade agreements like NAFTA or the TPP, the IPEF does not reduce tariffs or open new trade opportunities. Without clear economic incentives, some Indo-Pacific nations are hesitant to fully commit. Many have deep trade ties with China and are reluctant to risk economic retaliation from Beijing. China remains a dominant trading partner for most countries in the region, accounting for over 30% of total trade in many ASEAN nations. So, what's the verdict? The IPEF is an ambitious strategy, but without concrete benefits like tariff reductions, it risks being seen as just another geopolitical tool rather than a game changer for global trade. Chapter 6. Future Outlook and Global Implications, a Trade War or New World Order. As the U.S. pivots towards economic nationalism, the rest of the world is watching closely. The question is, are we heading towards a more divided global economy, or is this just a temporary adjustment? Possible future scenarios. Scenario 1. The rise of trade blocs. With the U.S. favoring bilateral deals and China strengthening its own economic alliances, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, we could see a world where major economies split into competing trade blocs. The U.S., EU, and Indo-Pacific allies would form one bloc. China, Russia, and BRICS nations, Brazil, India, South Africa, would create another. Developing nations will be caught in the middle, forced to choose between competing economic models. Scenario 2. A full-scale trade war. If tensions between the U.S. and China escalate further, we could enter a full-scale trade war that would impact everything from consumer prices to global supply chains. The IMF has already warned that prolonged trade disputes could shave off 1% to 2% of global GDP over the next 5 years. For American consumers, prices on electronics, automobiles, and household goods could continue rising. For businesses, manufacturing supply chains may need to be rebuilt, requiring huge investments in domestic production. For global markets, countries will have to rethink their trade dependencies, leading to new economic realignments. Scenario 3. A return to pragmatic trade deals. Despite rising protectionism, some economists argue that U.S. trade policies will eventually return to a more balanced approach. After all, history shows that economic isolation is rarely sustainable in the long run. The most likely outcome? A hybrid model, one where the U.S. maintains selective protectionist policies in critical industries like tech, energy, and defense, while still engaging in international trade on favorable terms. Conclusion. Trade policies are the lifeblood of the global economy, influencing everything from the price of goods to international relations. Understanding these evolving strategies is crucial for anticipating the future landscape of global commerce.